I'm not too sure if anyone has joined us live. We'll wait and see if anybody replies back in the messages, of course. But nonetheless, brothers and sisters, welcome back to Casual Catholic Conversations. Majdeleh, as we like to say here in the Maronite Rite. We have an incredibly special guest here with us. But before I get on with the whole introduction, the chatting with our special guest, I'd love to just give a quick shout out to Catholic Apparel. So catholicapparel.com.au. They do a whole wide of things, shirts, jumpers for kids and adults. They're super comfortable and they're by far the most fashionable way to be able to evangelize the country, which is the aim of all Catholics, I guess. So please go ahead to catholicapparel.com.au, and they also have an appeal right now where they're raising up funds for the Lebanese Solidarity Organization, and that's going to be going ahead to help out Lebanon. Special guest, Monica Doumit. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
The excitement is all ours. We can't believe in our short time that we have someone of your, let's say, stature, but I'm only saying stature because I can't think of the right word at the moment. Monica, you're a writer for Catholic Weekly, but saves me kind of butchering things when it comes to an introduction. I'd love for you just to introduce yourself to everyone and just kind of describe your occupational timeline, and also I'd love for you to touch on your whole Catholic journey, what your spiritual journey's kind of been like.
Sure. Well, so my current role is that I'm the Director of Public Affairs and Engagement for the Catholic Archdiocese of Sydney. That's a really fancy way of saying that I provide sort of policy and political advice to Archbishop Anthony Fisher. That's my main role. I've been doing that for about 3 years now. And for about 4 years before then, I was working in communications for the church, doing communications, I guess, on a lot of the tough issues. So whether it was the Royal Commission, I was the communications director for the marriage debate, so the Coalition for Marriage, and It's Okay to Say No. Or, you know, I imagine a lot of your followers will be familiar with.
Yes.
So working a lot in communications on controversial issues. But I came to the Archdiocese through a legal career. So I was a lawyer for about 10 years before coming to the Archdiocese. I studied medical science and law at university, and then did a postgraduate Masters of Bioethics. So I've always been really interested in issues of bioethics like euthanasia, which we're going to be discussing tonight, abortion, stem cell research, assisted reproduction, all of those types of things, essentially matters of life and death that are close to the heart of people of faith and especially of Catholics. So looking at the legal aspects of that, obviously the theological aspects. I worked in finance for a bit, in financial law, and studied some finance. And it's extraordinary to think about how financial considerations come into some of these decisions, particularly for government. And we can maybe get into that a little bit later.
Yeah.
So a little bit of an interesting journey to get me here, but I absolutely love what I do. I love that I get to, get up every day and really participate in matters of life and death that affect society as a whole and will do for so many generations. So it's such a grace to do what I do. So yeah, it just gives me so much joy. I'm a Maronite Catholic. So my family's from Philosopher. I raised sort of mainly practicing in the Latin Rite though. So I'm one of those, and always gives me a bit of grief about being a Maronite Catholic practicing Latin Rite. So, grew up in a family of faith, obviously. My parents are just amazing and really, models of faith for us. And I think one of the big influences for us was they always had priests and religious over to the house and had a sense of hospitality. And so that sort of formed my vision of the church. And then took it a little bit less seriously in my teen years and starting as a lawyer. And World Youth Day in Sydney was a real turning point for me. Yeah. Not the week itself, but the preparations and volunteering for it. I encountered so many just wonderful people, really holy young people who were just striving to these saints, and that had a massive impact on me and so many people I met during that time who were doing various other jobs are now, religious sisters, wonderful priests. And so, yeah, it was nice to, the witness of modern day saints, I think got me to take this a lot more seriously. And so making the switch from being a lawyer to coming and serving the church full time a real no brainer.
Yeah. And just with that, there's already a couple of points that I can already think about discussing with you. Considering you're from Frisgob, I'm actually from the Christ the Redeemer parish that's being established up in the hills, the Maronite parish.
Yeah.
I'm presuming you would know Monsignor Shaw Marie.
Absolutely.
Who from Frisgob doesn't know?
And his nephew, Father Ronnie.
Yeah, yes, Father Ronnie. I hope he doesn't watch this, but Father Ronnie supposedly has actually been doing some great homilies lately, and Mons has kind of been, I think he's getting slightly jealous. I feel like maybe the baton is being passed on a bit. But yeah, it's an interesting tale because not many people would think journalists have a master's degree in bioethics. Now, I presume that you and Bishop Fisher have a lot of conversations because I believe he has a doctorate in bioethics as well, if I'm correct in saying so.
He does. I have to say, I have to avoid some of those conversations because he's way smarter than I am, right? So I'm a little bit nervous that that my ignorance will show if I try to get too deep into the bioethical conversations. And Sayena too, I think, has qualifications in bioethics.
He most definitely does, yeah. It's amazing.
And I think also the Greek Orthodox Archbishop. And so we have this amazing situation in the country. And at the moment where you've got Archbishop Fisher, Archbishop Makarios and Archbishop Tarabay all with qualifications in bioethics. And what a providential time to have these three big leaders.
Yeah, especially big time, especially with what's going on. Thank God that we have them both. And the three of them are intellectual. I know the Greek Orthodox bishop. I've never met him personally, but I went to St. Andrew's Greek Orthodox College to study Greek for a bit. So I've seen his pictures everywhere. So I know exactly what you're talking about. But yeah, speaking about bioethics, you pretty much called it out. There's a big issue that's going on right now that's kind of gone under the radar, if I'm being honest, because I personally didn't know about it until this petition started going around. And that's obviously the issue on euthanasia. So I just thought I'd get you to first and foremost just talk about euthanasia itself. What's the current bill that's being discussed? And what's the consequences that end up happening if that bill does go through Parliament?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll situate it just quickly in an Australian context. So Victoria has legalised euthanasia. It's been in practice for about 2 years now. Western Australia has legalised it, and it came into effect just on the 1st of July. So that's just started there. Tasmania and South Australia both have laws that they've passed in relation to euthanasia, but they're in what's called an implementation phase. So it hasn't come into effect yet. Queensland is about to debate a euthanasia bill, and it's expected that it will pass there relatively soon. So New South Wales really is the last state standing, like we were for abortion. What the bill would do would be essentially to legalise both euthanasia and assisted suicide for people diagnosed with a terminal illness. And I'll just describe the difference between euthanasia and assisted suicide. Euthanasia is where a doctor or a nurse comes and gives you an injection of something lethal to essentially to kill you. Assisted suicide is where they write a prescription for you for some drugs, and then you take those drugs yourself at a time of your choosing. So euthanasia, it's actually the doctor who performs the act that kills you. Assisted suicide is, as the name suggests, it's someone helping you to commit suicide, to take your own life. So this bill in New South Wales, it's being promoted by the member for Sydney, Alex Greenwich. It would make both euthanasia and assisted suicide legal for people who are diagnosed with an illness with 6 months or less to live, or 12 months if it's a neurodegenerative condition, say dementia or something like that.
Wow. Okay. I'm glad that you clarified those two things because me, my lack of bioethical expertise, wouldn't actually know the difference between the two. But it definitely is interesting. Now, in saying that, with that obviously being pushed with terminally ill people, I thought maybe we'll bring a bit of a Catholic twist, but also I just want to try and get your opinion because I'm always looking for professional opinions. A lot of people, and especially people that Alters and I know, they'll instantaneously say, what's the problem? It's that person's life. It's that person's decision. I know a lot of times our arguments don't just stem with, God is the creator of life. We actually have other ways of being able to argue this point. I just thought I'd get some of the arguments from you, like your perspective of if somebody was to come up to you and say, what's your problem? It's their life. What's your business? How would you respond to somebody like that?
Well, first of all, I don't think that we should be shy about saying that God is the author of life. Like I resist a little bit people who think that we should keep religious arguments out of this.
Yeah.
The majority of people in this country are people of faith, overwhelmingly. And the Islamic faith, the Jewish faith agree with us on this issue. And so we shouldn't be shy about it. When, people in Australia come from a position of faith, and we shouldn't try to exclude that. We shouldn't play the games of the people who want to exclude that from the public square. But obviously we can't end the conversation there.
Yeah.
So what I would usually say is that while death is a very personal thing, it's not private. We all know that somebody's death affects so many people around them. It affects obviously their family and their friends. In this case, it affects the doctors who are implicated in their death, either by putting them to sleep, by killing them, or by providing them with drugs. The other thing that a lot of people don't know is how this affects society more broadly. And that's probably one of the really big societal issues with euthanasia. I'll give you an example. So over in California, they passed an assisted suicide law in 2015. And there was this woman named Stephanie Packer. And in 2012, she was 29, Catholic, mother of 4 kids. She got diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. And in 2015, they gave her 3 years to live. 2015, this assisted suicide debate is happening, and she was part of that campaign saying, look, I'm terminally ill, but I still don't want this law. The law passed. 1 week after the law passed, her insurance company wrote to her and said, we will no longer cover your chemotherapy, your pain medication, or your oxygen. 1 week after the law changed. And then they said, she rang them up to have the conversation, and they said to her, we'll cover your assisted suicide drugs and you only have to pay $1.20.
Wow.
The passing of assisted suicide laws takes away the choice for people who want to live.
Wow.
And that's really the message that if somebody says it's their business, it is their business, but it's everybody's business, because this affects the care of people and the way that we treat the sick, the way that we treat the vulnerable. The UN even went in and said in Canada what they're seeing is people with disabilities who are in permanent care are being pressured to ask for euthanasia. So what we find in societies where this is allowed, it starts to become expected, particularly on people who are seen as a burden on society. Yeah,
that's quite. You know what? I did a couple months ago during the time of Lent. I did a Vices series. So alongside the other Bible speaker at our parish, we're doing a Vices series, and we covered sloth. And it's amazing how the vice sloth has just come out so immensely here. Like, we won't cover your oxygen. We essentially have deemed your life to be worth no more than $1.20, and we just want to get rid of you. It's really making people both spiritually and physically lazy. There is no struggle anymore, and it's astonishing when you think of the Catholic principle of carrying your cross, and you're able to carry your cross and follow our Lord Jesus Christ, and that's a Christian principle. That's across the board. And that's being diminished. There is no carrying of crosses anymore. They're essentially telling you, no, take the easy way out. And I never thought about it that way. I didn't even think about the consequences when it comes to insurance. And it's essentially eliminating other people's options. Would you say that you can go as far as saying the insurance are just trying to save money at this point?
Absolutely. And look, dare I say, it's not only insurance companies. Euthanasia is cheaper for governments. And it's a horrible, horrible thing to say, but there are only so many resources that governments have, only so many health, only so much money they can allocate to health. Why would they be motivated to invest it into cancer research or into good quality palliative care at the end of life? When you can just write someone a prescription and tell them to go home and take some drugs.
Yeah.
So it's sort of saying in studying finance, economic factors really come into play here. And it's a horrible, horrible thing to say because, as Catholics, we know that every human life is of the utmost value. We don't place a price on human life, and euthanasia and assisted suicide crudely do.
Well, less than $2 at this point. Like, there's some things at McDonald's that seem more worth. They seem to have more worth than human life, and that's just such an unfortunate thing. Where do you think this all started? But where are the roots of euthanasia found? Because I always tell people that abortion has its roots in the sexual revolution, without a shadow of a doubt. And of course, it has roots in other different areas. Of course, when you really delve into abortion, the horrors of it. Where does euthanasia? Where does that start? What's the root of that?
It's hard to say. I will say that Australia was the first country to legalise euthanasia back in 1996. So the Northern Territory had a law very briefly. It only lasted for about 9 months, but we were the first country. So it's only a very recent phenomenon. This isn't something, like abortion that's been around for a long time. We're only talking 25 years. Yeah. And there's only a very, very small number of countries where either euthanasia or assisted suicide is legal. Most parts of the world, this is still completely abhorrent. So it is a relatively new phenomenon. I would say that it stems out, from my own perception at least, I think it comes out of this sort of demand for control. You see a lot of the people who advocate for euthanasia and assisted suicide are, Western, middle to high income earners, educated, Anglo. There's this sense of, I've been able to control everything in my life, and I've been in a position of control. Death is the one equalizer, right? It comes to all of us. But for people who are not used to being equal, I think that there's a real attraction in euthanasia. It's about the ability to exercise control over every part of your life, including death. That's my sense of it anyway. I think that there's this sort of individualism as well, and the push for sort of self-determination. And I think this is the ultimate exercise in that, because it's trying to take over the one thing that none of us have control over.
I'll get your opinion on something, if that's okay. I remember many, many years ago, and similar to you, I wasn't really too much into my faith in my teens, in my adolescent, and euthanasia was one of those things where I would think, okay, what is the problem? But I never stopped really searching for the answer. And I remember I spoke to Monsignor Shore once about it, and he said, in my experience, one of the greatest memories you form, or some of the greatest memories you form with your loved one, is actually at their dying moments, or at least at their last times. But anyways, building off that, it was funny because a couple of years later, I was actually, I think it was this year or last year, I was listening to G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy, and he speaks about suicide, and he says suicide is the worst sin. And I almost took a step back, and I was just like, well, what do you mean by that? Because we've kind of understood suicide to have different mental precautions. Of course, we have to understand that Chesterton wasn't during a time when psychology advanced. But nonetheless, Chesterton said, suicide is the worst sin because if you commit murder, you've just deemed that person who you've murdered unworthy of existence. But when you commit suicide, you've essentially said you want nothing else to exist either. There is nothing of value within your life. And to some people, that may sound a bit harsh, but I can see where you're coming from in the sense that it's about authority. People want as much control as possible, and if they don't have that control, well, why live, essentially? That's what it sounds like, to me at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we do a lot to avoid death as well. I mean, we don't even speak about it. We've lost the sense of preparing for a good death. I mean, that's the year of St. Joseph. He's the patron of the happy death, right? Like that should be something that we talk about in our families and things like that. But when you lose a sense of faith, you also lose a sense of how to prepare well for death. It would be, I can't imagine facing death, facing a terminal illness without faith.
Yeah.
Because what are you preparing for? You're preparing for, oblivion, and that doesn't sound particularly attractive.
That doesn't sound too good. Like, I know a lot of people that will think eternity sounds boring. Well, I'm sorry, but oblivion just sounds absolutely absurd to me. So I think I'll stick with eternity, if that's all right with everyone. Yeah.
So it's extraordinary. And you know what, it's really sad too. Like the thing about euthanasia for me is that it's just so devastating. Because you're saying that people sort of say, well, my life isn't of any value at all. Imagine then the government and your doctor and your family coming in and saying, yeah, we agree. Imagine, at the worst moment in your life, and look, all of us have them. All of us have that moment where you feel as if you're a burden on others, as if your life isn't worth living. Imagine when you're having those moments, instead of somebody coming to you and saying, absolutely not, you are completely loved, I will be here for you for anything. They come and say to you, actually, you're right, your life isn't worth living. Yeah. And so we agree with you and we'll actually help you to die.
Yeah.
That's the mentality shift too. Like some of the effects of euthanasia is that you don't see this. They say, what's your problem? It's the individual's decision. But we become a society that devalues human life, that looks at some people and makes a judgment and says, okay, your life isn't worth living. There's no dignity in your life. This whole, when they talk about dying with dignity, as if an illness can take away dignity. Yeah. Part of our responsibility as Catholics to fight this legislation is to remind people that nothing takes away their human dignity, because that's given to them by God and He doesn't take it away and we don't have a right to. So, part of the fight is really affirming the inherent dignity of every human person, and to not let people in the name of compassion try to tell them that they're not dignified.
You know what? That's such a valid point. It just seems like more and more society is opposed to the authentic Catholic message, and I tell people the Catholic message is not a depressing message. It's a message that even death doesn't have a sting anymore, as St. Paul says, and that's the message that we're trying to tell people, and it's absolutely on point. So with that, I want to go on to the role and responsibility as Catholics. What can we do? What are we meant to be doing? I know there's a petition that's been going around and people have been signing it. Thank God for that. But is there anything that you've seen within our community that we're lacking and we should be doing a lot more of?
Yeah, I will look, it's a hard one to say. The wonderful thing about the Catholic community, particularly in Sydney, is that they're always up for the fight. In so many other states, unfortunately, this legislation has just gone through because there wasn't a big fight. But look at what happened with abortion. I don't know if you remember that those rallies and almost the simultaneous vigil outside Parliament House and inside St Mary's Cathedral during that abortion campaign. The Premier said in her party room at that time that there would be no more conscience votes on any social issues during this term of Parliament. That's how big a noise everybody made on abortion.
Thank God.
Right, and that's how much it scared. That's how much it scared the Premier and scared other MPs. So the only reason that euthanasia has been held off so long in New South Wales is because of how hard everybody fought on abortion. So I really want to commend the faithful for getting out in such good numbers and for so long over that time. It's a little bit more difficult now, given that we can't rally as we would like to. But there are lots of things that you can do. So one of the things about signing up to that petition, in addition to adding your name to the petition, it also means that that we can provide you with updates on the campaign, what's happening, where to direct your energies. Soon enough, we'll have a picture of which MPs really need a little bit of convincing. And, you know, for those in their electorates, we will point you to your local MP and say, you know, Fred in whatever electorate, he could do with a call from 100 Maronites.
And he'll get the call.
Just
do not worry about that. Poor Freddie's voicemail is going to explode once that kind of information gets out.
It's the worst time to do it, right? Everyone in Western Sydney is locked at home and they're online. Try to push euthanasia and watch what happens, right?
Actually, you know what?
They're on their phone.
That's a valid point, because I was instantaneously thinking about, we're in lockdown, we can't protest. But we're in lockdown, we could actually technically do worse. We could pretty much shut the servers if we're not too careful.
Exactly right. And we should do it. And so, look, there'll be, you know, more communications coming out from follow Archbishop Fisher on all of the social media, sign up for updates from him. I know Edna will be doing the same thing and getting the message out on euthanasia. This is the thing is, this is a really hard one. Most of our own people don't agree with us on this. They think, what's the problem? But we have to remember that we're not trying to convince all of our family and friends. It would be helpful if we could, but this is a vote that will happen in Parliament, and so it's really our MPs who need our attention and who need to hear our voices. Yeah. And so a lot of you signed the petition that came through Hope. Hope will be, you know, playing a strong role in leading this, and we'll let you know when the appropriate time is to start ringing your MP, to start emailing them. And they want to hear from you. Some of our friends who are on our side say, I just need emails so that I can walk in and say, hey, you know, look at all of these people who I've heard from who are against euthanasia. So they want to hear from us. Yeah. The people on our side do, and also the people who aren't on our side need to hear from us. That's what we can do to fight this law. But it's also part of a broader question of building a culture of life. The reason so many people ask for euthanasia or assisted suicide in other countries is because they feel like a burden on their family and on their friends, and they don't want to be a burden. They feel isolated. So many people list isolation as a reason for choosing euthanasia. So we fight the laws, but we also need to be people who never leave the elderly or the sick isolated or feeling like a burden. And we can all do that. We can all, you know, again, we can't visit relatives in this climate, but, you know, make sure that we're there providing care for those around us who need it, because that's really the way we affirm their dignity. We uphold the value of human life. Yeah,
I like that approach. It's very nice and reasonable. Deal with the MPs first. Let's make sure this bill doesn't get passed. Then after that, we need to really focus on shifting the culture, and that is immensely tied in with re-evangelization and even catechesis within our own communities. Because you're right, unfortunately, there are a few people within our communities that wouldn't necessarily agree with us. So I guess it's just about, hopefully this video actually helps persuade them, because some fantastic points have been covered here. Monica, if it's okay, even though euthanasia is a big deal, there is a few other topics as well that I thought everybody would be interested in chatting about. And we'll put you a bit on the spot, but that's okay. People will thoroughly enjoy it. I wanted to talk a bit about your article that I actually did that video on. So, you know, people say, yeah, I did a good job. I promised you 90% of my points came from your article. It was just a phenomenally written article around, and I don't know how you did it. And one day I will ask you this, but we don't have the time for it. Your opinion wasn't arrogant. You somehow had an opinion that factored in everybody else's opinion. You understood everybody else's opinion, and yet you still somehow portrayed yours, and your one came out so brilliantly. So we'll get to that some other time. But first, I thought I'd just give you the opportunity to clarify your article, because unfortunately with words sometimes, and as you found sometimes even with the Protestant community and trying to interpret the Bible, problems are going to come into play because of words. So I want to hear the voice behind the article, so I thought I'd give you the opportunity just to clarify it. I believe it's Dear Premier, it's not that hard. What was your main point?
Well, it's funny. I'll tell you why I wrote it. I had a priest friend call me, actually. Two priest friends, different suburbs.
Yeah.
One said, "Look, I'm driving down the main street. My church is closed and the adult store is open."
Wow.
And he said, I'm so upset. I needed to ring somebody and say, what's going on? How is the adult store open and my church is closed? And I had another one ring me and say, how can people go and buy a coffee and stand around in a cafe and wait for their coffee and have a chat and anything, but they can't even just come and make a visit in a church. Like I won't celebrate Mass, but just to have the door open so that they can come and, come and kneel before the Blessed Sacrament for a minute. How is that any more risky than going to a cafe and getting a coffee? And so I was reflecting on that a lot because, it's hard. And also being in the political space, you want to try and find a solution for these things. And then I was watching the press conference with the Premier and the Chief Health Officer, and the Chief Health Officer, Dr. Kerry Chant, got up and said, what we're asking you to do is to redefine the notion of family. And look, I'm sure she was well-intentioned when she said it.
Yeah.
But when she said it, it was really jarring to me because I thought, you just don't get it. You just don't get it. You can't stand up there at a press conference and tell us to redefine what family means. And so I sat with that for a little while and then trying to think, how would I do it? If I was trying to convince Western Sydney, Southwestern Sydney, my family, my friends, to stay home and take this seriously, what would the government need to do? And really it was about going, well, you need to understand what they care about. And that's really the way you convince anybody to do anything, right? Whether we're trying to convince them to vote a certain way on euthanasia or on marriage or on abortion or anything, you meet them where they're at. You go, okay, what's the most important thing to you? Let me make this personal to you. And that was the disconnect between, I think, the government, the New South Wales Health and Western Sydney. And look, I don't want to be critical of the government. New South Wales Health, they're all working extraordinary hours and trying to keep everyone safe. And it wasn't about being critical. It was really about saying you need to be able to speak to these people and meet them where they're at. And when I say these people, that's me included. I'm currently in lockdown in my house as well. I'm not able to leave my LGA, but we're not going to take you seriously if our churches are closed and sex shops are open. Like we're going to think that this is disproportionate. This is discriminatory. It will play into a lot of the conspiracy theories that have been going around. And I was pleased that you mentioned that in your video, that this isn't about, okay, we're going to get a vaccine and there's going to be a chip or something like that. But you don't help people who feel that way if they look and see scented candle shops open and churches closed. Like you need to, if you're going to take it seriously, take it seriously. Yeah. To be fair, I think that the government's done that in the last couple of weeks since I wrote the article. And but that's it. It's really about speaking to the values of Western Sydney and the things that we prize the most. And look, I know family members of mine who would say, like I've got 11 nieces and nephews, and my mother will say, well, I might as well die. If I can't see my grandchildren, I might as well die. Like, what's the point? And there's a real sense of that. Like, they say, we're locking you down for your safety and don't see your family for your safety. But it's, for what purpose do we live? We live for family. We live for faith. And so I think that's what I was trying to explain. I said I wasn't trying to be critical. I definitely wasn't trying to give license for people to break the rules. But it's more about speaking to the hearts of the people out here, because they're good people who will, who'll give their lives for their family, for their friends, for their faith. And I think tapping into that is probably the better thing to do if you're trying to get a message across.
I honestly, it just seems the most logical approach. And, when I read your article, I remember just thinking about my grandmother. And my grandmother. She came over here, war-torn Lebanon. She came over to Australia, barely any family here, nothing for her to kind of, nothing of valuables or anything like that, and worked incredibly ridiculous hours. And, you know, if you asked her, would you do it again? She'd say 100%. She wasn't focused on herself at that point. She was just focused on the family. She was focused on her kids. And it was the exact same with my grandfather. And it's just exactly the same with everyone. You know, the only reason why my dad is here is because he's here for his kids. And you can't just tell him, yeah, sorry, shove that aside for a virus. Because don't get me wrong, yes, there have been people that have been impacted by this virus. But these are people that have come from war-torn countries who could care less if a missile came and blew up their house because they're just worried about their kids. Like, that's where the values are. And I just loved how you put that together. It's just all about, let's sit down and just have a conversation and let's be coherent about it. And I'm glad that you brought up, you know, you're not giving people license to break the rules because, unfortunately, I have been hearing that here and there, and it just wasn't in your article. Like, I read the whole thing, and not once in the article did you say go ahead and illegally protest or break the laws. All you said, it was directed towards the government. Let's sit down and let's have a conversation about values here, because obviously they've missed something. Funny story about that as well with the press conferences. I actually had a joke with some of my workmates. I said, if for every time Gladys says we're following the health advice, I was thinking about, you know, you might as well take a shot. And then I was just thinking you'd end up so drunk and then you end up in mortal sin. So we probably shouldn't commend that whatsoever. But so, yeah, with that whole lockdown stuff, I wanted to ask you then, from a good and reasonable perspective, is there something more that we should be doing? Because personally speaking, I've been vocal about this fact. There's been two extreme sides. There's either the conspiracy theorists who are convinced that the vaccine has the mark of the beast and that's it. Jesus Christ is coming back tomorrow. Or you have the other side that have been oddly silent about it, not really vocalizing, kind of just going along as if everything is okay. Is there a middle ground? Is there something that you've noticed that we're missing? Is there something more that we should be doing? Or do you think things are starting to line up again?
Oh, look, it's hard. You know, we've been in lockdown for 5 or 6 weeks now. The numbers today, I think, were at their highest than they have been. So I don't know why it's not working. So in terms of what we can and should be doing in terms of lockdown, I can't say that I have any proper advice. Yeah. What I will say, though, is that I think that we need to be wary of thinking everything is sort of government coercion, but also we need to be careful about how much we let. I'm going to say this carefully. How many restrictions we're willing to accept on the basis of, well, that's what the health advice says. Yeah. Because there's you know, the whole idea that everyone has to get vaccinated. I know that in Italy at the moment they're bringing in, what is it, like a green passport or something, and you're not going to be allowed to go to a cafe or a restaurant or even take lengthy trips on public transport unless you're vaccinated. Wow. And I think that there is some resistance to be made against this idea of you will not be able to participate in society without a vaccine. Look, I plan on getting vaccinated. I'll be very clear about that. So I'm not at all saying don't get vaccinated. But what I'm saying is that there needs to be a little bit of give and take. There are people with legitimate health reasons and legitimate conscientious objection reasons that they won't take a vaccine. And I think we start getting into very dangerous territory when we say that gives the government right to withdraw certain privileges from you. Yeah. There's, you know, imagine, and actually this has been argued before by certain Australian politicians, saying things like, if you're not on contraception, then you shouldn't be allowed to get welfare payments. And so thankfully those arguments don't go anywhere, but that you can sort of see this idea of, well, we're not going to give you, you know, single mother benefits unless you can prove that you've had sort of medium-term contraception, you know, implanted into you. And so we want to be very careful about what medical treatments we trade. for freedoms that we should have anyway.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be cautious. Not everything is a conspiracy theory. Not everything is, an unreasonable imposition on our freedoms. But we need to assess each restriction as it comes and have the conversation, because the more that you just give away without even questioning it, I think we set ourselves up for a dangerous precedent, for a more hostile government in years to come.
Yeah. But
that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. No, it absolutely makes perfect sense. And I have to give credit to our bishops once again, to His Excellency Anton Charles and Bishop Fisher. They have come out. They have been at least vocal when it comes to the whole vaccine stance, and kind of, I love how Bishop Fisher went about it. No offense to our bishop, of course, he did a great job. But Bishop Fisher, in his letter, I remember he said something along the lines of, even if bioethically it's okay to take the vaccine, in which he's shown and the church has explained, and it's done a great job of that, it's still not right to not give people the option to pick an alternative vaccine or to not get vaccinated. I think where the line is being crossed is they're being crossed from the common good for the totality, and they're starting to impede on individual rights. And that's where I think we're going to have a few issues there. But that was actually a very nice and modest way of explaining it, Monica. I think within the Lebanese community, I'm so used to either people being like so calm and trying to kind of ignore the fact, or they get so emotionally driven by it that all of a sudden, like everything, the whole world's just against them. It's great to have that kind of middle ground, that nice logical approach, but at the same time, hey, we shouldn't just let everything slide. There's nothing wrong with kind of questioning things.
And look, it's important for us to question things, right? Because you can't let everything slide. But if you fight everything, then no one's going to know what's important to you. So if you fight about every single government restriction, everything that comes up, then people are just going to assume that you fight all the time and ignore you.
Yeah.
So we need to, sometimes keeping calm actually works in our favour, because then when we get to fight and make a really big noise, people know we're serious.
Yeah. One last question. My apologies. And we're going to kind of shift the topic only because I know for a fact there's a lot of people within our community that are actually kind of ignorant to what's going on, at least in the political sphere. I wanted to ask you, have you noticed a particular tactic that because I remember one of your articles, actually, I was reading it earlier on. I think it's called Those Damn Catholics or something like that. Like they who won't shut up. It's actually quite an astonishing article how you speak about, all of them saying it's the Catholic Church. That's our main opposition. That's the person that we kind of have to get over. Have you noticed any tactics that the political world has tried to use in order to persuade Catholics to lean on their side? Like, just so we can make the community aware.
Yep. Well, two things. Sometimes, so when the abortion laws changed in the United States, one of the key operators was a guy named Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who was an abortionist, and then who ended up converting to Catholicism and becoming a real pro-life warrior in his later years. But he wrote a book, and one of the things that he said was that we had to pick an enemy. And so we picked the Catholic Church because we wanted everyone to fight against the Catholic Church. So from a political perspective, one of the things that they do, and you can see Andrew Denton is doing it right now when it comes to euthanasia. Gets up there and he says, our biggest problem is the Catholic Church, because then people think we're not fighting about euthanasia, we're fighting the Catholic Church. And they're a big institution and everything like that. So they some politicians make the Catholic Church an enemy because they think it will turn people in their favour. So that's the first thing we need to be aware of, right? That they use us almost as a decoy. And look, politicians tap into where people are in order to convince them. When it comes to Catholics, they'll play on our disillusionment with the church, right? Scandals in the church. I mean, how many of them used during the abortion debate? The Catholic Church shouldn't be allowed to tell us about, caring for vulnerable children, because look at what they did, and look at the abuse crisis. And so they try to play into, legitimate concerns that we might have as Catholics, weaknesses in our faith, try to separate us as well. A really good priest friend of mine says, the Holy Spirit unites, and anything that seeks to divide us is not of the Holy Spirit, right? And we need to remember that as Catholics, particularly in this debate. So, politicians will try to divide us. They'll try to pit us against each other within the church, and also pit us against other faiths. One of the things I think, I'll be blunt, one of the things that's sometimes difficult for Eastern Catholics is to work across interfaith lines as well, work with our Islamic brothers and sisters, with our Jewish brothers and sisters. But they're great allies to us on things like euthanasia and religious freedom. And so we need to work with other people as well. The government will do, not the government, politicians will try to divide us and separate us sometimes, but we're much better and much stronger when we're united. So I would say that, keep an eye out for anything that tries to divide us, and also anything that tries to assert that this doesn't have consequences apart from the individual, that this is all about an individual choice, and that nothing else, because we know that's a lie. There's no choice that we make that doesn't have an effect on other people. I mean, that we talk about sin like that, right? Like that's why, that's why we need to, not only repent of our sins, but also, do penance as well, because we know that individual sin has consequences on the body of Christ more broadly. And that's certainly true. Anything that tries to divide people, that tries to make them feel like this is just, that they're just an individual and nothing else, they're things really to be wary of, and they're tactics that our MPs use way too often.
Yeah, well done. And that theology you just mentioned, it taps into the whole purpose of purgatory and plenary indulgences. Like, we'll get into that some other time, because plenary indulgences is just talking itself. I believe that is it, and I don't think we've received anything in the meantime in terms of questions, but that doesn't really matter, because Monica, we've thoroughly enjoyed your time here. Honestly speaking, it was good fun. It was great fun.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's been great chatting. I almost forgot we were actually doing this.
It got to the point. People. Honestly, I was about to say, it's like I was chatting to one of my mates. And a lot of times, unfortunately, you think of lawyers and you just think about these flashy people, but it's great to see. Like, lawyers are real people. Like,
we're human. Yeah. Sometimes.
They're human sometimes too. Monica, like I said, just thank you very much. We'd love to have you on the show some other time. And for everybody that listens to this later on, I'm pretty sure Monica will have no problems whatsoever if we pass on some questions that you may have if you didn't have the time to catch us live.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not that difficult to find either. So if anyone wants to get in contact directly, look me up and I'd be happy to chat.
Beautiful. And one last request just on you and Monica. Please do speak to Bishop Fisher, because we would love to have him on the show. If he's willing to come on, if he even has the time, the poor thing. I could imagine how busy she is at the moment.
I'll see what I can do.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Brothers and sisters, Allah Makun, God be with you all. Monica, God be with you. Thank you for joining us again.